Welcome to Phenomenal Conversation number 35 with Benjamin Freud. We're going to explore the territory of education and regeneration. And before I get Benjamin to introduce himself, I'll just say a little bit about Phenomenal Conversations. Phenomenal Conversations interview change makers that are embodying the change. We try to ask profound questions. We're trying to amplify meaningfulness and nuance in the midst of the polycrisis, and also expand imagination to embrace that same phenomena. And there are two formats. This format is a one-on-one interview, and then once at the end of the month, largely a last Tuesday of each month, we do a group conversation and we invite participants to engage together with the interviewee in a phenomenal conversation. So that being said, I'd love for Benjamin to give us a brief synopsis of your bio and introduce yourself, and then we'll dive into these areas around regeneration and education.
Thanks so much, and I love what you're doing, and how you're positioning this series. So I'm Benjamin Freud. I'm just going to give you like the CV version of who I am. There's so many different
Sure.
entry points here, but I'm the head of upper school at Green School Bali. I am originally from France, though you can't tell by the accent. My mom used to work for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, French, and that's why I traveled so much. So I've always traveled quite a bit. My academic background is actually history and international relations, and my first career was in consulting and technology consulting in Silicon Valley in the late 90s, and that's where I was always a little bit of a rebel. I mean, my master's was on the myth and reality of Che Guevara, so it's always been a little bit that revolutionary piece. And when I was in Silicon Valley, I was 24, something like that, and I was working with 27, 28-year-olds who were really changing the world. I mean, these guys didn't care. They wanted to break everything, all the rules, and just do things. And so that made a huge impression on me. They were just a few years older, but at 24, it's enough of an impression. I did that for a bit, got an MBA because back then I thought that I could just get an MBA and walk into any job. The market tanked in 2000. And then I ended up in London, did more consulting, went into Japan, did more consulting. Then I gave it all up to get a PhD because the stars were aligned where my wife at the time was moving to Singapore, so I could do it. Very, very lucky. Long story short, after kids, I realized that well, actually, my kids gave me more energy than most adults. So I really enjoyed it. I love school. So it just made sense one day. I remember we were on the couch, like, I'm just going to go into schools. Fast forward, I've just fell into some of the most progressive schools out there, really innovative schools, really schools that also like to break the rules. And then probably by 2018, 2019, I realized, maybe a latecomer to this, that this whole ecological breakdown thing might be something serious, something to pay attention to. And I started to read more and more about just ecology and quantum physics and ecosystems and living systems and all these things. And, you know, the response to the ecological breakdown for me is education. So when I was able to join Green School Bali, then I did, and I probably would have left education had I not been able to join Green School.
Okay, so I'd love to dive into the Green School because from the sound of it and what you're posting, I think this is very original and inspiring for aspiring educational change makers. But just tell us a little bit about the ecological awakening and the journey you went through, because I sense you're doing something a bit more creative and generative than simply sustainability, which has been around for a number of years in schools. But let's just get to this ecological awakening and what happened for you in that moment.
Well, you talk about epiphanies, or at least you did before we hit record. And I was really into project-based learning. It was really super cool and something that's always interested me. And I've been lucky enough to be in schools that really open to that. And so I started to get to know Tom Markham, who you might know also from LinkedIn. He's like the godfather of PBL. At least that's how he likes to joke about it himself. And anyways, we talked, and he sent me his book, or I got his book. and there was something on one page of his book that talked about quantum biophysics. And I have no idea what quantum biophysics was, but
Mm.
it was about how the ants were working together and were able to like coordinate from different places. And I thought this was super interesting.
Mm.
So I looked into quantum physics, and not saying, that I understand much of it, but enough to be curious and to pick up, popular science books on it. And I ended up getting my hands on a book on biocentrism. And I ended up reading about this biocentrism specifically connected to, and the reason why it made sense that we should be life-centered is because of entanglement, superpositions, and what happens at the quantum level.
Yeah.
So that made me actually, right, like really go against student-centered learning, really go against it because I realized that it just promoted individualism, it promoted atomism, it promoted the sense of the self with the capital S, and that's really not what we probably should look for when we're trying to figure out how to work through these things. And if we're all entangled because we all came from the Big Bang, then how is it that we're trying to continue to atomize ourselves by saying student-centered is the way to go? So all of this just led to these wheels turning in my head, and that was really that page, that moment that really got me into this whole idea. And then if we think about this entanglement that we're in, it really brings us closer to ecological awareness, understanding what might be some of the reasons for the where we are now.
Yeah.
And just I don't know, maybe that's the word. I've never used that word, but you use it, awakening. It could be just that. Yeah.
Just for people that might be good if you elucidate in a little bit more detail about entanglement, what
Yeah.
that means, because I think that's profound, and it'd be good to just elucidate that for people that may be unfamiliar or may have heard it because it's being used a lot, but may not
Sure.
know where it originated.
Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, most of our views and our sense of reality, and I guess this is what the Ian McGilchrist talks about when he talks about left brain. We kind of see things, and we're taught in school, force equals, mass times acceleration, all these Newtonian physics. And
Yeah.
and that there's this idea that Lassalle was saying back, I guess, in the 18th century, that if you had a demon who was smart enough, he could predict all the movements of all the atoms and all in the whole universe 100 years from now, because
Yeah.
everything's determined. But at the quantum level, there's nothing's determined. It's indeterminate. So this idea of entanglement is that you could take two photons or two of anything, and they're tied together. They're connected in some way that we don't understand. So you can be 100 billion miles apart, shoot them in different directions, and they will spin according to one another, and they will always do this at the exact same time, even though they would be communicating faster than light if it's hundreds of billion miles away.
Yeah.
So in this sense, we're all entangled, so we're all connected. You
Yeah.
add to this idea of quantum fields where there's nothing in between, there's no such thing as void, there's all these 16 plus the boson field between us, then really we're talking about the inability to separate anything in life, in anything in matter. Everything is connected, or even better, everything emerges from relationship. Even that word connected is actually wrong because it entails that we have things first, but we
Yeah.
emerge from a relationship, and from that relationship, things come. So that really blows my mind. And then thinking, well, shoot, if that's the way, yeah, let's take care of our planet. Let's take care of all living things. I mean,
Yeah.
it's just easy ways to get into very simple lessons.
And let's just go on to how has that awakening or insight influenced the way that you're designing learning in your school, the Green School in Bali? How does that show up?
So it's one thing to think like this. It's one thing. So we can kind of connect this to regeneration because and I know we might get into this idea of nature, and it's all brought in together. But if we think about regeneration and connect that to education and learning, it's really thinking about how life is at the center. So going back to that biocentrism that I was talking to before. And so if life is at the center, everything that we do should be in the service of life. Now we're starting to get into more regenerative approaches, creating conditions that are conducive to life, if you talk about the biomimicry piece, but that really should be the only reason why we learn. So it's also this idea that learning doesn't do anything if you don't connect it, sorry, I'm trying to stop using that word connect, but if you don't associate it, bring it together, entangle it, whatever language you want to use, to doing. And learning and doing are really the same thing. But in most schools, we think of learning as this accumulation of knowledge. But even though they're not separable, we can think about the learning, so to speak, in quotes, as the potential energy. But once you start doing something with your learning, then that's transformed into kinetic energy. And so we need both things in order to like develop these cycles. So what we do at Green School Bali is the stuff that we're doing at the same time. We really see that relationship, and we're doing things in the service for life of life. Now, is it perfect? Absolutely not. But at least that is our lodestar. That's what we're trying to go towards. That the projects that we do should contribute to the community, be it human or other than human. And that's really the minimum criterion for anything we do at Green School.
In many ways, our learning pedagogy is very, very similar. I want to bring that in also for adults. I mean, I'm struggling myself also to be connected to a project here just because I'm an expat in a new development. But for anybody listening or new to these ideas, can you illustrate a project that you're doing that best captures your aims or vision here that you're doing practically with the students in Bali?
I wouldn't even know where to start. Let's
Just,
start with one.
just one example.
It's fantastic. So we do coral restoration. We're really lucky to know that some of our kids go and they restore corals. So one kid,
Oh, yeah, yeah,
yeah, coral.
yeah,
So coral, like you take this hexagonal structure, you put it down, and then you take the coral and then you attach it with a zip tie, and then eventually the coral grow, and then you restore that environment. But this kid said, "But hold on a second, you're tying this coral with a plastic zip tie. You're just putting more plastic in the water, in the ocean." So what he did was he developed this biodegradable zip tie that by the time the coral attaches itself to the structure, it dissolves and doesn't leave plastics in. So that's one thing. We could do another one where a kid is developing he surfs a lot, so he's got a helmet. So he's made it out of recyclable and recycled and recyclable materials for surf helmets, things like that. So he's designing what this helmet might look like, and there aren't too many out there.
yeah,
The projects are like that. They all have to have some kind of contribution
yeah.
to the more than human communities.
So you mentioned your growing allergy around the individual centeredness of education. And what I hear you saying is we should be nature centered first. So those sort of projects, are those singular by one student, or is it a group of students, or how does that dynamic play out in the school in Bali?
So they tend to be every project in every class that has projects. Now, it'd be great if every class had projects. They don't, but most do.
Yeah,
So the one that I mentioned about the zip ties and the surf helmet, those are our greenstone. Those are our capstones. So those are going to be grade 11, grade 12s doing this.
right.
You'll have other kids who are maybe a little bit younger. We also have grade 8 capstone. But other projects as well. We have one student, we've got a mycelium lab. Now, there's a whole ethical thing around using mycelium. I get that, but I'm just going to try to skirt that issue. But they're working with mycelium to create these soundproof panels in one of the buildings that they're creating. So they're just playing with these materials.
Yeah,
I'm not sure that necessarily contributes to the world, but at least it doesn't put more junk
yeah.
in landfills. So it's all the projects. It's just kind of baked in. I mean, we're talking about a school that doesn't have a single rubbish bin on its campus
No
because you
rubbish
can't
bins.
bring no rubbish bins because you can't bring anything that should be thrown away. Everything should be recycled.
Well, that's really nature doesn't make waste, only
Mhm.
makes food, as it were, or
That's right.
nutrients.
That's
And
right.
tell me something about how engaging in this way affects the pupils, because there's the projects and what they produce, but the pupils themselves, how does this affect their development and their learning? I'm sure people would love to hear about that.
So this brings up a good point, is that when you go to Green School Bali and you see that it's all bamboo and all the structures are of sustainable materials and that, we've got solar panels and collect rainwater and all that stuff. It's the operationalization of sustainability in the sense that, if I told you there was a place with solar panels and recycling bins and I don't know, compost, you don't know if it's a Walmart, a bank, a school or whatnot. So there is that operational piece that's quite sustainable. I'm not going to say regenerative just yet, but it's just at least sustainable. But
Yeah,
really, the point here is that we try to flatten hierarchies as much as possible.
yeah,
So in the school itself, not only can the kids guide the learning and the experiences inside the school, certainly they can develop their own projects, but they could also say, we'd like to learn about this within a certain class.
yeah,
Actually, maybe we should take it this way. And the culture says that it kind of does happen. The kids also come to me and say, at the end of or in the middle of every term, I say, hey guys, what would you be interested in learning next term? And so they volunteer classes and we try to offer those classes.
yeah,
We've got student government that they take as a class, so they get credit for it, and they help us. They co-write policy for us. So we've got a real school where the hierarchies are flattened. So
yeah,
then these projects are able to come alive because there's very little or very few restrictions around them. They're only limited really by imagination, sometimes logistics.
yeah,
And so it allows them to say, I'm going to do this. I mean, not all of them do, clearly. It goes, but they're going to say, I'm going to do this. This is what I want, and I'm just going to make it happen. So you really feel that that you are there supporting them rather than dragging them along.
yeah. And let's just um, pursue that just a little bit because I work also in an alternative school. We found in the beginning, we our catchment tended to be students, some of the students that just didn't function in regular school and had some kind of antipathy to learning, and
Hmm.
we couldn't change that. We
Hmm.
did the best we could, but in the
Hmm.
end, without the family system changing or some profound thing happening for the child, we didn't work. So, in terms of um, do you work with students with issues and help bring them along, or are you finding that you tend to students that aren't suited to that school environment, you don't invite them in? How do you manage that interface?
But that's a complicated one because clearly the school survives on admissions.
Yeah,
Now, I go through every single admission, and the questions that we ask on a video are, uh, we ask like, what does sustainability mean to you?
yeah,
What great things will you do at Green School? And how do you live sustainably? Something like that. Now, anybody can say anything. I get that,
anything, yeah,
but nevertheless, we try to move that narrative away from why do you want to be at Green School to what great things will you do, and we try to tell them that they're super fortunate to be in a position where they could pick whatever project they want. They don't have to take exams, no A levels, no IB, no nothing.
yeah,
They can do that. So people throw the word the privilege is a very thorny word, but there really is a
yeah,
privilege. And I don't mean
yeah,
this in a socioeconomic way
yeah,
in that sense, although that is there too. But it's like, wow, look at what you guys get to do. So we try to just have that as a different culture. Now, there are some kids who are just coasting. There's no question. I
yeah,
don't think you'll find many schools that are like that aren't competitive because we're not competitive.
yeah,
So we'll work with just about anyone. However, it would be very difficult, and fewer kids I'm noticing are into that category. We're trying to raise expectations as well.
yeah.
Um, yeah.
So, one of the things that we found is that some students resist the culture of being uplifted. There's
Mhm.
something already, sadly, kind of determined to be self-destructive or destructive to the culture. So we learn from that. Well, then moving on, I mentioned about I mentioned about how does it impact students, and you talked about flattening hierarchies. I was also kind of more interested in the
Mhm.
nature first principle of centering the education on nature and the effects of that on the students, because sustainability has been in schools and the kind of doom and gloom of sustainability in a way, and the lack of uplift in that message
Mhm.
hasn't necessarily produced generations that can really engage with the problems we're facing. How does nature first, as a principle, affect the way the students engage in their own lives, but also in the school life?
That's again very complicated. The reality is that a lot of our students don't live that kind of life. They still, throw stuff away, single serve. I mean, I've gone on school trips and they're like the first ones to get the plastic water bottle. So it's going to take a long time. It's going to take a long time. I'm not going to say
Yeah,
they're all like, green thumbs and everything. So it's challenging, but what I find fascinating is the contradiction between some of their life, and I'm not saying this is a good thing at all by any stretch, but the contradiction in some of the way their lifestyle is, as opposed to their learning experiences.
yeah,
The
yeah,
learning experience tends to be very focused on these ways of contributing to community. And then of
yeah,
course they go home and they have like these like plastic cups and things like that. So there's a lot of tension and contradictions there, and hopefully we're still making a little bit,
yeah,
of a change there. So it's far from perfect, but I always say we're never going to get it right, and we'll never get there because it's a process, and
yeah,
we're just going to go and continue and stay true.
yeah,
So it's a funny thing, nature first, right? Because there's so many people who say like we shouldn't even use nature. Like saying nature first like separates us from nature, and then nature is everything and everywhere. And I'm not too bothered about using the word nature. I'm not too worried about using it in a way that because words are just words. Like we shouldn't get caught up with words if it prevents us from thinking about concepts. Now, I know words matter. I know they matter, like in every sense of the word matter. But at the same time, we could probably, work around that depending on how nimble we are intellectually to say, let's just use this word nature, natural world, whatever we want to say.
yeah,
So it's not always the natural world that comes first, but it is community.
yeah,
And community, if we think of it within the more than human realm, within the other than human realm, within the human realm, then we're able to be a little bit more agile with how we think of it because community is something that we can, well, we just do that. We feel a part of it, right?
yeah.
So it tends to be easier to talk about community than it does to be about nature. Nature still feels far away. We need to do this for
Right.
nature. It
Okay.
still feels far away.
Yeah.
Community to me is all living things, all earthlings. And that tends to be a more uh, an easier entry point into having kids do things to talk about community. And community can be your animal kin.
Well, that
Like,
reminds me,
yeah.
actually, Thomas Berry's famous statement, are we a community of objects or a communion of subjects? So
Mm.
that very much underpins, I think, what the lived experience of community. So, if
Mhm.
you are you active in working on projects with indigenous or inhabitants in your environment in Bali? There, do you interact with the community in that way as well, or are you talking specifically about the school as a community?
So any way we want to talk about community here. So 7% of our students are local scholars. That is, they're Balinese who they're fully funded and they tend to be like the best ones, the best
Yeah, I
students, like the
bet.
ones amazing. Um, and so a lot of what we do is so we're an international school that's going to be in a bubble as all international schools are. We have a very strong emphasis on Balinese traditions. Half the staff is Balinese. There's
Oh,
there's
okay.
ceremonies. Oh gosh, I want to say out of a 10-term week, maybe 4 times, something like that. There's the only language that we teach is Bahasa Indonesia. We don't teach anything else. And we try to work with local schools. Now, that could be very white savior. So what we try to do, and again, I'm not saying we get it right, but we try to go over there to help and then invite them to come over to the Green School to help. And whenever we present anything, we present it 50-50, in like 50% Bahasa Indonesia, 50% English.
Yeah.
Sometimes we try to, have each other present in like each other's language. So we try to make it reciprocal as possible.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that sounds pretty fascinating. So, just to go on to, I was mentioning before we began the call, your recent post. I mean, you've sort of mentioned the allergies to using the word nature, but there was something in your post of, you have nature quests where people go out into nature, or you have nature-based education where people go and teach outside in nature. I don't think those are bad things, and I think people have an intuitive and soul-based response to those environments. But I do worry that there's some kind of unwitting dualism being
Hmm.
involved. And when you were talking about entanglement, to me,
Hmm.
that emphasizes that we're also embedded in nature, even though we are destroying it. So I'd love to hear more about your thoughts about the kind of this, um, say, non-dualism, kind of editing out or going back to the original non-dualisms, you could say, without duality.
Yeah, this idea of nature culture, right? The nature culture dualism.
Yeah,
Even in schools, it's this idea of kids are nature. They come out like Locke was saying, like a blank sheet or blank page, and
yeah,
then we have to fill them up with our culture. So even in schools, there's this idea that the nature and culture are different, and that culture should overcome nature. Again, I don't have such a big thing about using the word nature, but it has to be, obviously words don't exist in themselves. They're always contextualize, and meeting happens within the relationship that we have in our communication. I'm not crazy, but however, we can still use nature either as shorthand, and I definitely don't like defining words, because in the word definition, there's definite, and then it's like Deleuze
yeah,
was saying that you pin a butterfly onto the wall once you do that, and words are living
yeah, yeah, yeah,
relational um, so to me, like if I was to think about the way I approach nature, it's a process. It's not a thing. It's not a place. It's a process of enlivening.
yeah,
There's no nature on Mars because there's no life on Mars, as far as we know. Nature is that enlivening, that process of enlivening, and it needs life, and it is life.
yeah,
But when we say we go out in nature, then it really does separate things. It really does say it's out there. And that is a way, probably a poorly skilled use of the word nature.
yeah,
Nature-based education also, if you have nature-based education, that means you could take away a nature-based education. So it ends up being an add-on or something that we put on the side. Or
yeah,
so I have problems, I have issues with, not necessarily that it's nature-based, but the approach that we have when we say we're going to have a nature-based education.
yeah,
Because nature, as a process of enlivening, I was going to say is everywhere, but it is everywhere, but
yeah, yeah,
in a spatio-temporal way.
yeah,
Well, and this is also very important, and this is where the story has to, in my opinion, should change. They say, but you're in Green School Bali, it's easy, you're in the jungle, I'm in the city. I can't go out in nature. But that's the wrong story,
yeah,
because nature also in the limestone. Limestone is phytoplankton.
yeah,
This computer that I'm talking to you on is made of plastic, or has some plastic. That is also formerly alive things.
yeah,
So that, if we look at it over 13.8 billion years, or even if we look at it over 3.8 billion years of life on Earth, life is everywhere. We just need to tell those stories of life.
yeah,
And so by considering nature in the way we learn, it's just about that reciprocity with life. And whether or not we put nature or life, it doesn't matter. Again, it's the concept, the approach, the thinking, the feeling that we have away from the tyranny of these words, and
yeah.
approaching it in such a way as say life is all that matters. What is the point of learning anything if it doesn't contribute to life?
Yeah. Oh, this is really like nectar for my heart to hear you speak in that way. It really resonates. I actually had somebody critique something I posted about its lack of um, recognition of some indigenous wisdom, and I was sympathetic to that. But I also, in my deepest longing, I would like every single human being, irrespective of where they are, to claim their own indigenous heritage as
Yeah.
possible. the universe itself as being a
That's
human
right.
that's existing here, whether they're of mixed race like me, or whether they're not
Mhm,
living where their elders are, or whatever, or they're divorced from their cultural roots. There's a
mhm,
way, and I think teachers have a role to play by inhabiting this in themselves, their own enlivenment.
mhm, mhm,
So
mhm.
then maybe that
Absolutely.
would lead on to how you're training and working with your staff to embody and um, transmit these sort of principles. Because of course the students have to learn. They're coming from different backgrounds. Maybe a more fertile ground in some ways might be your teacher faculty. So
Mhm,
how you engage your teaching staff in these
mhm.
ideas? What sort of things do you do?
So, and I'm not, and maybe also we can bounce onto the idea of indigenous wisdoms in a bit too, because I
Yeah,
find this part very fascinating. It's so thorny and dangerous.
yeah,
But for the teachers actually, I try to hire people who are green. And again, that's a joke, right? Like, what does it mean to be green? But people who have this approach. I would rather find someone who is excited to dig a hole in order to build something that's going to enliven place, that's going to do good, and I use that, in the most simplistic of way for this place, for the people, than people who are subject experts.
yeah,
So we always start at the point of hiring, and also a couple things. One, we got to stay and keep repeating. We have an opportunity at Green School to do so much. We have so much freedom from a curriculum point of view, so much freedom to do what we want. The teachers can propose the classes they want. The teachers can, there's opportunity. But that means there's a
yeah,
responsibility to this burning planet, to the mass extinction that's going on. We can't just be free without that responsibility. And
yeah,
then, of course, I bring in the responsibility that we are here in this VUCA world where we don't know what's going to happen in 27 months, which is just about the amount of time when ChatGPT came out 27 months ago. We don't know what's going to happen. We have to be ready to respond in ways that are skillful. So it's continuing to say this message. I think from a teacher training point of view, also, we really try. I know there's a lot of people like in the IB, especially PYP, who work with inquiry-based learning. And I have no issue with inquiry-based learning at all. I ask what questions are posed in inquiry. And we really try to pose questions that are regenerative questions. So not just generative questions, but regenerative questions. Questions that ask us to explore ways that we can create conditions conducive to life.
yeah, yeah,
How might we do this? And again, it might not be just, environmental studies. It could just be in the way we are in relationship. A
yeah,
historian can talk about that. Like, how might we create conducive to life? Understanding maybe fascist movements, and how might we look now today at movements that aren't fascist, but also have this kind of edge to them? And what might we do? How might we respond to that? So always thinking about in this framework. And once you start asking those questions, you start, kind of putting these trajectories or influencing the trajectories of learning.
yeah.
Um, and that's the way to do it. But it's a long, 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 long journey. And that's okay. It's okay.
So in a way, you're taking inquiry-based learning, but you're putting it in service of the planet or the greater whole. That's what I'm hearing anyway.
Yeah. The questions we ask lead us to learn, to curiosity. And the curiosity is, how might we create the conditions conducive for life? That's it. Like, why are we learning? Why are we learning about energy? That's cool, but there's so much more we can do in terms of energy, in terms of, again, if we talk about regenerative, life's regenerative principles.
Yeah,
Energies means something completely different to trying to, get a dynamo to work. Now that's cool too, but what are
yeah.
we using the dynamo for,
No,
right?
exactly. Yeah,
How might it be done?
yeah.
So for instance, I know this sounds another project real quick. We learned about electricity because it's super important. So we created a bike that has a thing that has a dynamo, and that powers the lights for the theater production.
Right.
Does it create the conditions conducive for life? I don't know, but it's pretty cool to know that every time the lights dim, it's because somebody switched out and somebody else is cycling in order to
Yeah,
create
yeah,
power. It's
yeah.
just those little things.
I think I saw your picture of that on LinkedIn one time.
Could do, yeah.
I think we're coming to the end. It's great to hear about what you're doing in Bali and your whole philosophy behind it. Um, what would you say helps you distinguish? Oh, I think this is sort of in the regenerative space. There's stuff that is badged as regenerative, but not truly regenerative. And I mean, I'm not questioning that you're not authentic, but how do you ensure that there's an authentic imprint of regenerative rather than a kind of badge or a marketing or a hip thing that somebody's doing at the moment to get attention?
Gosh, that's a hard one, isn't it? And
Yeah,
always we have to think about how we respond in this sense, and always question, is it enough? And I tell you what, there's so much that I do that's not regenerative
yeah,
because simply, I take a car to work because
yeah,
I'm, like there's all these things. So we have to live in that contradiction. That's the important part.
yeah,
But I think that what it comes down to, and there is this gold rush on regeneration. A lot of people who are doing regenerative, we need to find global regenerative solutions. No, no, no,
yeah,
no. All these things. So
yeah,
um, I think all I can do is say that I'm not there. And I don't think anybody's there because regeneration is a process, and we are regenerate like even the process of learning about it is regenerative,
yeah,
so long as there's intent and we try to learn from our errors or misgivings. I do know that one of the things that I know I'm not getting it right because when you put regenerative in front of a course, we're going to learn about regenerative X, and you still live in a system that has exams. You still live in a system that perpetuates individualism and extraction.
yeah,
That's when it becomes BS because that's when it's not really regenerative. If you're doing it and you're not doing it great, that's fine. If there's still a lot of things, but at least you're on a certain trajectory. And for me, the idea that the big horizon is to move away from this idea of assessment, of learning all that individualizes us and starts thinking about how might we move communities together? How might what we do and learn move communities together and do it together? That starts to be
yeah,
more a paradigmatic change that gets us towards more regenerative cultures. What's not regenerative is saying that we're going to teach this course on regenerative something something because we're going to include trees and nature knows and blah blah blah. That doesn't work for me. So it's challenging and it forces you to kind of look inside, look outside, and I know there's that inside outside dualism. But I think I read the other day that any 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 insipid truth can't handle contradictions, but deep truths can totally handle
yeah.
tensions and contradictions. So I'm going to go with that.
Well, I think that actually, a number of the comments you've made throughout the interview have illustrated that this isn't clear cut in any means.
Mhm.
It's starting out on a journey and,
Yeah.
just admitting that you're not going to get it right, that you're going somewhere, it's going to be messy, and that
Mhm.
just being honest that you're
Yeah.
not there yet, I think is a far more uh, real place to start from than the kind of presenting the best and not admitting, what's going on in the shadows. So the shadows are also included. And I think you've demonstrated that through the way you've talked about the school, yourself, and the teachers and all of that. So inclusive of the messiness in a way, you could say, yes,
And just one more thing on that, and that's what regeneration is. It's
yeah,
appreciating that every moment in this place, in this relational, assemblage is unique. It will
yeah,
never happen again. This will never happen again. Therefore, every time we are reinventing this phenomenon, this event. Again, that goes back to quantum physics. And
yeah,
so as such, there can be no best. We just try to figure it out
yeah,
right here, right now, based on this unique set of relationships. And so you can't model anything.
yeah,
So every time we're learning it again and again, which is why we'll never get there.
yeah. Well, in fact, I think, you've also talked about process. And I think
Mhm.
this shift away from fixed, we are who we were in the past, these fixed ideas, the rigid ways of thinking. And um, letting go of that, and we create more enlivenment in the moment with each other, and that as communes and ecologies, that's my vision for how we can learn together. I think we're long way from it, but we won't deal with the ecological realities without that kind of community of learning.
Right. Absolutely.
And well, shall we close it there? But love, any last words you'd like to add, or before we end?
No, I think the big thing for me, we have Green School in the jungle in Bali. My dream is to have Green School in the city. And I don't know if Green School will ever be able until we have it in an urban setting.
Yeah,
And we demonstrate that it's not about just living in bamboo. It's about this approach
yeah,
to slash as life.
yeah,
And that's something I'm convinced can be achievable. So let's look for alliances rather than bicker about these petty points. And that to me
yeah.
is going to be something big in the next 4 years, looking for alliances rather than bickering.
Yeah.
And I'm really scared and hopeful at the same time, but that's how we just are about what might come out if we think about these alliances.
Fantastic. Green schools in the cities. I'll end
Mhm.
it there.
All right.